Hey, and welcome back to the All My Love Lucy podcast. We're so glad you're here with us as we continue to step back in time and follow Lucy and Jimmie's love story, one beautiful letter at a time. This is episode number 33, and this is another audio only version. Megan has been sick, so you have Jennifer here, but we didn't want to have a long delay in releasing another episode, so here we go. Now, if you're a first-time listener, we always want to encourage you to go back and start with episode 1. This podcast is more of a series podcast, and we have covered a lot of information. So it'll make more sense to go back and start at the beginning. But keep in mind, in our earliest episodes, our production skills were brand new, and although we still don't consider ourselves professionals, the production of the podcast has evolved over time. Nevertheless, the emotion in these letters was just as powerful in the beginning as it is now. So let's get started with letter number 33. Lucy is writing from London to Jimmie, and we find out in this letter where he is now. September 26, 1944. My darling Jimmie, I received 2 lovely letters from my sweetheart this morning, which made me very happy. I also received a proof of my picture this morning, and they said the finished portrait would not be ready for another 2 weeks, when I will send you one for your mother. Now, as we have mentioned many times, mail during wartime was very unpredictable, often delayed for weeks, so receiving 2 letters in one day would have felt like a tidal wave of reassurance, because for Lucy, every letter that she received from Jimmie was proof that he was still safe, he was still thinking of her, he was still reachable, despite the chaos of the war. This wasn't just mail, it was almost like survival. For Lucy, each envelope she received was a breath she didn't know or didn't even realize that she'd been holding. Calling him my sweetheart all the time and my darling Jimmie always shows this romantic confidence that keeps growing between them. Their written connection was becoming really its own emotional universe in these letters. The tone here is peaceful and excited. It's not weighed down by the fear or longing, but instead it's lifted. So this part of the letter, it kind of feels domestic, almost ordinary, in contrast to the extraordinary world they're actually living in. These little sparks of normalcy, mail, photos, planning to have her portraits, these were all precious moments in 1944. By late September, London was still under threat from the V1 and then the newly launched V2 rockets. We've talked a lot about this. Air raid fears had not disappeared, but the city was adapting to the new threats. And we talked about how Lucy mentions that last time, how they're kind of adapting. They realize there's something new coming and they don't really know what it is, but they're kind of preparing for it. Now, at the same time, the U.S. 50th Signal Battalion, which was Jimmie's unit, was moving deeper across Western Europe after the success they had had in France and now after the liberation of Belgium. But these communication units that he was a part of were essential. They were constantly moving forward to keep the Allied advance connected with one another. So while Jimmie was literally out there chasing the front line as it raced through Europe, Lucy was navigating a London that was still reeling from rocket attacks, yet somehow she was finding joy in little things like a photo portrait to send to her darling boy, Jimmie. Now, mentioning portrait studios, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but portrait studios in London were still open at this time. The problem was the materials were rationed. So waiting 2 weeks or more for a finished portrait was very normal at this time. And if you recall, she had actually already been waiting for several weeks to even get this proof. There was film processing that was slower. Resources like the photo paper were being carefully managed and rationed, so it's been very hard to get. But these portraits were often intended as keepsakes for soldiers or the sweethearts back home, something tangible to hold when letters just felt a little too fragile and not enough. They would hold those. And Lucy talks a lot about holding Jimmie's photo and sleeping with it under her pillow and kissing it. Those tangible things that she was doing with this photo. So it wasn't just it was more than a keepsake, in my opinion. This portrait that she was having made for him, it wasn't just a photo, it was a promise. It was something that she hoped Jimmie would carry with him. So it's sort of a way for her to be with him, even as he moved closer to danger in what he was involved in the war. Now, we've talked a lot about the contrast in the modern day compared to back then. Today, if someone you love is deployed, then you can get texts, you can get emails, and even video calls. But in 1944, Lucy had to wait sometimes weeks for a single letter to arrive. And those weeks could be filled with fear, dread, uncertainty. We've talked about all of this. So we really want to focus on when she says these things. This emotion that she's feeling is very real, and it's very overwhelming for her, I'm sure. Her happiness here wasn't just that romantic feeling. It was relief that he was alive. Nowadays, we take hundreds of photos on our phones every week, probably. But in 1944, a portrait was a rare, carefully planned event. You dressed up for it, you saved for it, and the result became treasured family history. As we hold some of Lucy and Jimmie's photos that they had made back then as great treasures and part of our family history, we hold those as precious treasures. This adds weight to Lucy mentioning this about this photo. This adds weight to that she's even mentioning that here. She knows how important it will be to Jimmie to have that photo of her. Through these simple lines here, we see Lucy in a rare moment of calm, savoring love in a world where everything else is uncertain. She goes on to say, "Well, darling, I wonder what you will think of it. What do you think of the old boy gate crashing into the picture? I think he's a very fine fellow." So I didn't really understand what this meant, so I had to really look this up and research this. But Lucy, obviously here, she's clearly teasing Jimmie here about what he thinks of her photo. I wonder what you'll think of it. She's anticipating his reaction to her portrait, inviting him into a shared moment, even though they're very far apart. This is a light, romantic kind of teasing, the kind that keeps that connection alive during these long separations that they have. Now, the old boy gate crashing, this is a mystery, but it's also kind of a joke. This line is full of 1940s British charm. She's actually referring to someone who ended up appearing in the portrait with her, or what we call it nowadays, somebody photobombing you. It was likely unintentionally that this guy ended up in the photo, or perhaps as a photographer assistant or someone who popped in accidentally ended up in her photo. But she called him the old boy and said he was gate crashing. And so that shows a little bit of her humor here. She's painting it as if this man intruded on her special gift to Jimmie, but in kind of a funny, harmless way. And by saying, "I think he is a very fine fellow," she's kind of disarming any jealousy or misunderstanding that Jimmie may feel here. It's a flirtatious reassurance, playful but affectionate, telling Jimmie, basically, don't worry, this guy's not a threat. It's all in good fun. He's a fine fellow. And so I really, the first few times I read that, I did not know what she was talking about. It made no sense to me. So I was really glad I looked that up and figured out what that meant. Many of the studios and the photo studios during wartime London back then in 1944 were small. They were cramped, even operating sometimes in basements or shared commercial spaces because of all the damage from the bombing. So it wouldn't have been unusual for, like I said, a studio assistant or maybe a relative waiting in the shop or another photographer to be visible in a test shot or a proof photo like she's got here. She's got that proof. So Lucy may have chosen to keep it because she thought it was funny, or maybe the studio couldn't redo the shot quickly enough due to the rationing and the workload. And maybe she just wanted to send Jimmie something that she had right now, despite its imperfections, just to get him something, get her photo to him in his hands. So you have to remember again, the photo film and paper and chemicals were all rationed. So retakes of these photos were not easy. They weren't cheap. And so an intruder or a photo bomber in the picture was more of a quirky wartime inevitability than a problem. It was just bound to happen. So in today's world, as we bring it into today's world, we would just retake the photo. But in 1944, a portrait was, especially at this time with the war going on, was really kind of a small miracle. So he kind of just rolled with the quirks and didn't really get too worked up about that, as you can see how Lucy talks about that here. Today, photobombs are everywhere, sometimes intentional, sometimes hilarious, and Lucy is describing what is essentially a wartime photobomb, but with 1940s politeness and charm, and how she describes that. This is a great moment that we can kind of get the sense of her humor and how she looks at things. What she calls that gate crashing, it comes with a wartime twist and a lot more grace, but we can instantly feel her humor here and feel how lighthearted she is, and she's teasing him a little bit. But now we send, and we talked a lot about instant communication. We talked about that in many different episodes. Now we can instantly send photos by text. But like I said before, that planning to have your portrait made during this time, I just want to reiterate what this means and what would have had to have happened. It was a big event that you had to have planned for. So not only planning it, saving for it, dressing up for it, but going to a studio, paying for that session, waiting weeks and weeks for the proofs to come back, and then taking that precious photo, and mailing it physically through a war zone, going through the censor, taking weeks and weeks to maybe sometimes arrive to the soldiers. So this brings it into a little bit more, even though she's just barely mentioning that here. It really made us think about what it would have taken to get a portrait during this time. And she knows how much effort goes into this gift for him. And I think she's really excited to get that to him. So she's sending the portrait not only to him, as she says, but she's also sending it to his mother. Now this brings in showing how she already feels deeply connected to his family. Even though she's never met them, she's never even seen them, she already feels that connection, that she's wanting to send a photo of herself to his mother. And so this is just a sweet glimpse into her personality and some more of her emotion. This charming, humorous, she's eager to make Jimmie smile, even though he is across over in Europe, thousands of miles away and advancing in war. She continues, "I'm glad you liked my special letter, and what you say about it makes me very happy, and I just love you more than ever and long for the time when we shall be together." Now, if you've watched the last episode, I am guessing that he has responded to her saying that she felt naughty, and all the passion that we felt in that last letter that's kind of unusual, kind of changing a little bit. I think he probably responded to that, and so she called it her special letter. That's what I'm guessing. He's obviously responded to her, and so now she's responded back, likely expressing that I guess maybe she may have been a little concerned how he would take that, and so he's reassured her that he liked her special letter. So that was kind of an emotional risk for her. As you can, if you've been following along and you've listened to the tone of her letters, that's kind of unusual for her. So that was kind of an emotional risk for her to say that to him. She opened up her heart, and then obviously his response to her reassured her that that was okay, that he liked that. So by letter 33 here, their relationship has moved even deeper, even steadier, even more certain. And this line that she says here, "I just love you more than ever." Now keep in mind, they've not seen each other in over 4 months. And so all they have been able to communicate with is these letters. And so these letters have really caused their relationship to move into this more steady, stable, this affection that's growing. These letters are just that, I guess, bedrock of that. I don't really know the word to describe what I'm trying to say, but so this is perhaps the clearest expression of longing so far in this letter, that she longs for the time when we shall be together. She's always imagining the future. She's always thinking about that day when they can finally get married. And if you are a first time listener, they are engaged at this point. They had been together for months. I don't know exactly how long. But they had been together for a while and had gotten engaged right before he left to go to France for D-Day. So they were engaged at this point. So they were planning on getting married in London there before they moved to South Carolina. So the plans that they had, she still thinks they're going to happen at this point. She still thinks that he's coming back at any moment to London, and they're going to get married there in London with her family there. And then they were going to travel here to the United States. So at this point in these letters, she still thinks that. That's still her hope. So she's always imagining the future. She's always can't wait for him to get back because there's a wedding that she's planning. There's a wedding that she's waiting for. And very soon she's going to start talking about that. And she's going to really start preparing for this wedding. So that's just a little bit of going ahead, but I don't want to get too far ahead. But something people did in wartime very cautiously was imagine the future because things seemed so dark. The future was not guaranteed. So the hope itself is very brave at this moment in time. In 1944, separations like theirs were typically long, uncertain, and filled with the fear of silence. Just like you could tell Lucy was before, I think it was maybe last week or the week before, she was really afraid that it had been 10 days that she hadn't heard from him. And so that silence would have been filled with fear. Not hearing from him, that would have been filled with fear, wondering if he was okay. Letters often became the place where people built their relationships entirely in imagination, entirely on paper. When she says she longs for them to be together, she's expressing something every wartime couple felt during that time. So we get a sense, not just about Lucy and Jimmie, although their story is so important to us because it's our grandparents, but this is we get some more insight into what most couples that were separated by the war, what they were feeling at this time, that ache of waiting, the fear of loss, but that determination to keep believing. So that was a lot. That was what was going on with these wartime couples that were separated. By autumn of 1944, Londoners were exhausted. The Blitz, although it was years behind them, there were these new V2 rockets. They were terrifying. They have just experienced all the terror of the V1 doodlebugs from the beginning of June. This has been an exhausting period of time for Londoners where Lucy was. These V2 rockets arrived without any kind of warning. So hope and fear lived side by side during this time. And against this backdrop, love letters weren't frivolous. And I really want to get that point across. These letters were not frivolous. They were fuel. They were sustenance. They were survival. So saying these things, when Lucy said these things to Jimmie, just telling him that she longed to be with him, she couldn't wait for them to be together, she was looking forward to the future. That line of hers isn't just romantic. She's not just trying to be romantic for Jimmie. She's trying to help him survive and come back to her so that they can build their future together and have a life together. Any mention of future plans like that, when we shall be together, things like that, carried emotional weight because everyone knew tomorrow might change everything. But people still dreamed because dreaming was resistance to the enemy. And in today's day, in 2025, distance often means long distance phone calls or long distance relationships with video calls, text messages throughout the day, photos shared with each other instantly. But for Lucy and Jimmie, longing wasn't a temporary inconvenience. It was actually woven into the fabric of their relationship. They didn't know when or even if they'd ever see each other again. Today, people often hold back in relationships. They hesitate to express deep, deep feelings too early. But in wartime, life being so fragile accelerated emotional honesty. Lucy's words might sound bold to modern ears when you hear all that she's saying. But in 1944, love moved at the speed of fear and hope intertwined. So in this moment, Lucy is shifting from her usual teasing warmth to something more vulnerable. She's responding to a reaction Jimmie made about that special letter. You can feel how relieved she was that he received it in the way that she had hoped. And then she writes how she loves him more than ever. She longs for the time they shall be together. This is wartime honesty, unfiltered, unapologetic, in a world where rockets still fell on London without warning. And Jimmie was moving across a war-torn Europe towards Germany. Imagining a future together wasn't just romantic, it was an act of courage. Today, we can FaceTime someone we miss. But for Lucy, longing was a daily companion. Every word she writes is a promise for him to hold on a little longer. She goes on to say, I am glad my darling is well, and please be extra careful now you are in Germany, as they are such treacherous people and really hate us all. This is an important and very emotionally charged passage here, and it also contains the kind of wartime generalizations that were extremely common in 1944. They may sound harsh or prejudiced to modern ears, but this is fear talking, not hatred. She is not hating the Germans. She is speaking out of that fear. When she says, please be careful now you're in Germany, she's writing to a man she loves who's just crossed into enemy territory. Her tone is urgent, protective, and even anxious. And that statement that she makes about Germans being treacherous people, that was shaped by the fear she's experienced, real fear from the bombings. And when you're living under that kind of the bombings that she experienced of the Germans raining down that terror on her world for such a long period of time, you're going to feel this way. Out of fear, you're going to think, these people hate us. They hate us. You're going to think that about them. There's no not thinking that. If you are living in that time period, in that day, you would think that too. I would think that too. But for her, this is a way of saying, please don't trust anyone there. Please come home alive. And the more deeply she cares about Jimmie, the more intense her warnings have become. You can get a sense of that from last week and now this week. But this line really shows her anxiety spilling into her writing here. Now, by the time Jimmie reached Germany, it was known to be extremely perilous. British civilians had already lived through the Blitz, which was that massive German bombing of London in 1940 to 41. The V1 flying bombs, those doodlebugs from June to October of 1944. And that's not even, this letter's in September. She's still got a little bit more of that. And then now the V2 rockets that have just started a few weeks before this letter, silent, impossible to detect these mysterious bombs. So these British civilians have lived and are living at this moment, are living through all of this. Tens of thousands of British civilians have been killed by German attacks. So this fear that Lucy is expressing, it wasn't abstract. It was personal and lived. It was in her backyard, so to speak. That was natural for her to feel that way after everything that she's experienced from the Germans. So Lucy is echoing the common language of her time. Most, if not all, British citizens felt this very same way. So what she says here, we get that sense of what the general public was, the thoughts they were thinking, the things they were feeling, and how they felt towards the Germans. Now, as the 50th Signal Battalion moved into German territory, they weren't only facing soldiers. As we mentioned last time, they were also encountering other things like booby-trapped buildings, mines, snipers, civilians who were often desperate, starving, or hostile, civilians who were not loyal to whichever side that you just didn't know who to trust. So Lucy's fears were not unfounded in terms of the physical danger. Now today, we tend to understand that a country's government or their military and civilians are not one identity. We separate people, most of the time we separate people from regimes. But in the 1940s, especially at the height of war, this nuance didn't really exist for most civilians. Today's world emphasizes individual identity, cross-cultural understanding. We try to understand each other, and then also the complexity of different nations. But for Lucy in 1944, the world was defined by clear lines of ally versus enemy. National identity equating with wartime allegiance. It was a different time. It was a different mindset. Emotional survival depending on simplifying friend versus foe. So her words reflect the emotional and cultural pressures of a world at war. This part of the letter reveals that fear very vividly, that fear that sits right beneath Lucy's playful affection. She knows Jimmie's crossed into Germany. And to a Londoner in 1944, that was the heart of danger. This wasn't hatred again, it was terror. It was a woman desperately asking the man she loves to stay alive. It was a plea from someone whose city has been attacked and is still being attacked, whose future was uncertain, and who worried that every day might bring the news that she dreads. So when we read these letters today, we also read the emotional language of war. She continues, I am fire watching again tonight, and shall be glad when it will no longer be necessary. Now, we have talked so much about fire watching. I don't want to keep going into it and going into the details of it every time she mentions it, because she mentions it a lot. That's a huge part of her life. We talked about that. But when she writes this, you can feel both the responsibility that she has, but also the exhaustion from it. She's so tired of this. Fire watching wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. It was cold. It was often boring, but sometimes frightening. And it was done at night when you're already exhausted from working and from doing just normal life. Her tone here suggests that she's pushing herself through it because she has to, not necessarily because she wants to. I think she was glad to do her duty, but she's been doing this for a long time. She's tired. So by this letter here, she's balancing work. We talked about she was working 2 jobs. She did give up her job that she was working a couple of nights a week. She did give that up, but she's still working a full-time job, and she's mentioned how they keep her there late. So she's working long hours. She's working a lot. But so she's balancing work. She's balancing the bombings and the fear from that, the blackouts, the constant worry she has for Jimmie, and now another sleepless night from fire watching. So you can really hear her exhaustion and fatigue here. This is a glimpse into the strain of the endurance that British civilians were experiencing during this time. The longing, when it will no longer be necessary, is a soft, tired wish that the war would end. It's one of the few lines where she directly acknowledges how hard wartime duties are for her personally. We have heard her mention fire watching. I don't think we've really heard her say she'll be so glad when it's no longer necessary. So you can really, like I've said before, her mood is shifting. You can hear that she's really getting tired. She's really, this is wearing her out. And she's really hoping it's going to come to an end soon. Fire watching or fire duty really quickly, it had become mandatory during the Blitz in 1940 and continued throughout the war. It meant being stationed on rooftops or high up in buildings, watching for those incendiary bombs that were dropped to set fires everywhere. It meant sounding alarms when necessary. It meant extinguishing the small fires before they become catastrophic. These volunteers were the first line of defense against burning cities. So even though the Blitz ended in 1941, fire watching continued because sporadic raids still happened. V1 and V2 rockets caused fires. The government also didn't want to be caught unprepared, so they kept these fire watchers, these fire duty going. And by 1944, many civilians were just plain exhausted by these ongoing mandatory shifts that they had to partake in. It was dangerous, but again, like I've said, it could also be boring. Most nights, nothing happened, which is really what you wanted. But then when something did, it could be deadly. So you want it to be boring, but then it's boring. So it's kind of like you're in this position where you don't want it to be chaotic or exciting, because that meant it could be deadly. And many fire watchers were killed trying to put out these bombs, these incendiary bombs. Many of them were killed. So you knew that your life was in danger if you did come across one of those. But women like Lucy played a massive role in the fire watchers. They frequently served as fire watchers, messengers, ambulance drivers, first aid volunteers. Now we know Lucy was the fire watcher. Her fire watching duty placed her squarely within the network of women who kept London functioning under this bombardment from the enemy. And when you look at today in modern comparison, nothing in our daily life really compares to this fire watching duty. Today, I guess the closest equivalents might be emergency response volunteers, or maybe on-call firefighters, community watch programs, that sort of thing. But even those don't really capture the same mixture of national duty, constant threat, sleep deprivation, public expectation, and that emotional exhaustion that the fire watchers during this time experienced. So really, there is no modern peacetime equivalent to civilians taking shifts on roofs at night waiting for bombs to drop. There's really no modern equivalent to that. So Lucy wasn't a soldier. She wasn't serving in the army or anything like that. She wasn't a soldier, but she still had that mandatory wartime service layered on top of her job and her personal life. Now in 2025, the idea of being required to stay up all night watching for incoming rockets kind of feels unimaginable. It feels like it's something we just can't even picture ourselves doing. So this helps. This right here is just kind of helping us when Lucy talks about this. It's helping us feel the physical strain that she carried every day. She's just really tired of it, and it's really hard for us to imagine that. So this line isn't just a line about a nighttime duty. It's about endurance. A reminder that while Jimmie was advancing across Europe, Lucy was fighting her own battle back home, one sleepless night at a time. She continues with, "It is autumn here, and the leaves are beginning to fall, and every lane looks carpeted with gold. There's a lovely garden here, and lots of flowers, and still a few roses left." This right here is it's gorgeous. It's so visually rich. It's just, I love it so much. I love how she describes that here. And it's such a striking contrast to what she's already been talking about and the wartime reality surrounding her at this moment. She is creating this moment of calm, not just for herself, but for Jimmie by describing that. I'm sure her imagery here, the leaves are beginning to fall. Every lane looks carpeted with gold. I'm sure when he read that, it just had to bring a calm to him and a moment of maybe peace, and just imagining that, describing those changing leaves and the flowers is just her way of offering him something peaceful to picture amid the chaos that he's experiencing in Germany. Her imagery here is gentle, almost poetic. Every lane looks carpeted with gold. This line right here reveals to us more about her. It reveals her romantic nature, as we already know she's got this romantic nature, but this reveals it even deeper. It reveals her observant, artistic eye when she sees beauty in nature. It also reveals her desire to send him something uplifting. And when she writes about the roses and the garden, she's bringing Jimmie into her world. She's saying, even though we're far apart, I want you to see what I'm seeing. So she's describing that for him. This is intimacy through description. Her surroundings become a love letter in themselves. Throughout the war, small encounters with beauty were emotional lifelines. Lucy seems to be grounding herself in nature here, finding quiet joy in the turning season, something very stable in a world where so much was unstable. In the mention of roses, and as we all know, her favorite flower are pink roses. So she mentions the roses here. This is a personal, tender detail. It's as if she's offering him a small piece of herself here. And I really love that she mentions about the gardens and the flowers. While Megan and I were in London and we had just left the church where Lucy had been baptized when she was actually 21 years old. She was baptized at a later time in her life. We had just left that church and we were walking up the street. We've shared this before, but there were no flowers anywhere. We didn't see any flowers. We were just walking up this street in this neighborhood. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we come upon this huge rose bush that was coming over the brick wall in front of a home, and the roses were pink. And we just felt like that was such a special moment and a piece of her that it was almost like she was there with us there in London in her church neighborhood. Autumn in 1944 in London would have been a bittersweet season. Beautiful colors, shorter days, colder nights of fire watching, ongoing rationing, V-2 rockets beginning to fall, nature's beauty contrasting with wartime anxieties. Many Londoners cherished gardens, and Lucy surely did. Private gardens, communal gardens, or even tiny allotment plots. They were all places of mental escape, practical food sources, symbols of normalcy, and they were patriotic. There was the dig for victory, and we've heard about victory gardens. But the fact that Lucy emphasizes a lovely garden suggests this space was meaningful to her, so it was that peace for her in the midst of the city's destruction. Roses were ration-era luxuries. Cut flowers were not common during this time, and many gardens were repurposed for growing vegetables. So the presence of roses, especially in late autumn, would feel very special, almost sentimental. And again, when Megan and I were there, it was actually almost the exact same time of year, in September, late September like this, that we saw those roses. So they definitely felt special and sentimental to us, but during wartime, they definitely would for Lucy. Today, we openly talk about mindfulness, nature as therapy, grounding ourselves, and all of these things. Lucy's instinct to describe her surroundings is exactly that. She's using nature for emotional regulation long before she even had words for it, probably. If she lived in today's world, she would be sending Jimmie a photo of the golden leaves that she saw on the lane, on the walkway, on the road. She would be sending a picture of that last rose that she saw in that garden. She would even probably send a quick video of all of this. But in 1944, she only had her words. So her descriptions are vivid because they were meant to replace the images that she could not send to him. This is a reminder that even during global conflict, people still sought and found beauty. So instead of sending a photo, Lucy sends imagery. Instead of sending calm, she writes it. It's a quiet gift, a way to give Jimmie a moment of peace from inside a war zone. And maybe it's a way to give herself one too. She continues, I noticed the moon was up about 7:30 this evening, and I thought of my sweetheart so many miles away and wondered whether he would see that very same moon. I shall never forget our first evening together when we had a full moon to light our way. I think it was a fitting beginning of a new year, which has proved to be the happiest one in my life. And I feel it's nothing compared with the very many happier years in store for us when we shall be together and grow dearer and closer to each other as the years go by. This is probably one of the most emotionally powerful passages Lucy has written so far. Rich with romance, symbolism, longing, and a striking sense of hope for the future. She is blending love under a shared moon, distance bridged by memory, and a fierce belief in a life beyond war. When she writes, I thought of my sweetheart so many miles away and wondered whether he would see that very same moon. This is one of the most timeless expressions of long-distance love, especially in wartime. She's using the moon as a physical object they can both see, a shared anchor in the sky. It's her way of saying, we're under the same sky, we're not as far apart as it feels. Her reference to their first evening together under a full moon is the emotional centerpiece. She's reliving it. She's cherishing it. She's using it as emotional fuel, reminding Jimmie of its importance. This memory becomes a private treasure they both hold on to during uncertainty. This is one of Lucy's most hopeful passages. She writes, "I feel it is nothing compared with the very many happier years in store for us. This is so brave in the middle of an unpredictable war, when she truly doesn't know if he'll even survive or if London will even survive. She is choosing hope, and hope is an act of defiance against the enemy." She's building a future with him in her mind, brick by brick. We can feel that. Moonlit nights were symbolic during World War II, and they mattered. Air raids were more dangerous on bright nights. Soldiers on the move noticed the moon because it could expose them. Blackout regulations in London made night walking dependent on moonlight. For Jimmie, seeing the moon in Germany might actually mean danger for him, but for Lucy, it means romance and memory. This contrast is historically powerful. Now, Lucy is referencing New Year's here. I'm assuming that she's talking about the beginning of 1944. If that's the case, I don't think that they met in 1942, like New Year's 1943. I don't think they met that far back. It had to be probably New Year's Eve or New Year's Day of 1944. So this year, if we're talking about that, if we're talking about the beginning of 1944, she is referencing a year that had been very momentous. There was D-Day in June. There was their separation in May. The Allied liberation was advancing, the beginning of the end of the war, but also the V1 and V2 attacks on London, the harsh reality that many people they loved might not come home. So her saying it's the happiest year of her life is remarkable. Love transformed what was otherwise one of the darkest periods in modern history. During World War II, imagining a long shared life was emotionally risky. Engagements and marriage were often rushed, and dreams were fragile. And we know that Lucy and Jimmie were actually engaged. They got engaged right before he left to go to France. When Lucy talks about growing dearer and closer through the years, she's not naive. She's just very hopeful in the face of this unimaginable uncertainty. Now, a modern comparison about the moon that she speaks of, even now, separated couples say things like, "Look at the moon tonight. I'll be looking too. We're under the same sky." It's one of the few things that hasn't changed with technology. But unlike today, with FaceTime, messages, instant photos, the moon was one of the only things Lucy and Jimmie could simultaneously experience. Modern long-distance relationships often have clear timelines. We'll see each other again in 2 months. We can talk every night. Lucy and Jimmie had none of that. They didn't even know if a letter would arrive when they sent it, much less when it would arrive. Yet she's dreaming of future years, of closeness, something even many modern couples hesitate to talk about, even in stable times. Today, people take pictures to preserve moments. Lucy preserved it in memory and in writing with such tenderness that it becomes almost cinematic. In a world where tomorrow wasn't promised, Lucy still dared to dream decades into the future. This letter isn't just a love note. It's an act of courage by her. It's a promise made under that moon that both of them could see, even from thousands of miles apart. She continues, "Well, my dear love, I'm getting sleepy and will have to make some more tea to keep me awake. My colleague is having a few hours sleep until 3 a.m. when it will be my turn to sleep until 7:15. I keep looking at your picture, which I always wear, and wish you were here with me." So Lucy is clearly tired. She writes that she's going to have to make some more tea to keep her awake. This shows her resilience. Even during the late night duties of fire watching, she's pushing through that fatigue to fulfill her responsibilities. It's relatable. I mean, who hasn't had to fight sleep to finish a task? But it's also heroic. She's doing this during wartime and under pressure and in danger. So her tea ritual here humanizes her, a small comfort in those long nights that she has to stay awake. She also mentions that her colleague is sleeping until 3 a.m. and then her turn will be until 7:15. And I did not realize that they would take turns sleeping like that. I thought they were both awake at the same time, maybe talk to each other, but I didn't realize they would take shifts and sleep. So that's kind of new news to me. But this gives us a window into that structured chaos of wartime work where people took turns to keep watch or perform those essential duties. But it also emphasizes that Lucy is not alone here. As we've discovered not too long ago, we didn't know that she was with someone. So now we know she's definitely not alone. But the night still belongs to Jimmie in her mind. She's still thinking about him in her mind. She's always, when she's on Firewatch, she's always thinking about him. So he's always in her mind. She writes, I keep looking at your picture, which I always wear, and wish you were with me. And I know this is audio only this week, but I have a photo of her, one of her portraits, where she has a photo of him on a brooch on her jacket or on her whatever she's got on, and that's a photo of him. So I guess she always wore that. But this is a very tender, intimate line here. It's very human. That physical closeness of carrying his photo, which we talked about earlier, the emotional closeness she maintains by thinking of him, that vulnerability in admitting she wishes he were there with her. But it's just that window into how her love endured despite those extreme separation issues and the stress. Now, given the previous references to fire watching and other nighttime responsibilities, Lucy here is on the shift that involves vigilance through the night. 7:15 marks a morning wake up, which, as we know, she had a job, so she was going to have to get up and go to her regular job. These shifts were exhausting, especially under wartime conditions with the blackout restrictions, cold, rationed food. So her mention of tea here isn't trivial. It's one of the few ways that civilians could keep their energy and morale up during these long hours. Carrying photographs of loved ones was extremely common also for soldiers and their sweethearts. Soldiers kept photos in their pockets or their wallets, but women kept miniature portraits in lockets or on their person. Like I was talking about, Lucy had that on her, on her jacket. But it served as a tangible connection to someone far away, a comfort that letters alone could not provide. This was especially meaningful when communication could be delayed for weeks, as we've talked about. Now, today, in modern days, many people stay up late working. I do. I stay up late working. A lot of people stay up late studying or caring for others. The difference is just scale and danger. Lucy's fatigue exists alongside wartime threats, not just deadlines or personal schedules or personal preference or anything like that. We now have phones, FaceTime, text, selfies. We keep talking about this over and over. Instantaneous ways to carry someone with us. Lucy's locket, or that picture that she had on her jacket, was her only tangible comfort. It's slower, it's more deliberate, it's arguably more emotionally potent than a quick photo on a phone. We've talked about many times how we take the instant for granted, and I believe this is just another example of that. But what she says here about his photo and her keeping it, wearing it, always wearing it, it's a simple act, yet it speaks volumes. Love maintained not through constant words or technology, but through a tangible object that she carried close to her heart while she keeps watch over the city and endures the night. Even in sleep-deprived hours, her affection shines through, reminding us that love can be a steady light in the darkest times. She closes with, oh, by the way, don't forget to let me know when you want some more writing paper and envelopes, as I expect you have used most of it. Good night, my darling, and God bless you and keep you safe always. With all my love, from your very own Lucy. Now, when Lucy writes about the writing paper and the envelopes, it's a small practical gesture, but it's deeply caring. She really is thinking about his needs and wants him to keep writing to her. This shows her attentiveness to both the material and the emotional sides of their relationship. She's not just talking about his emotions and saying how much she loves him, but she also wants to provide him if he needs something. She wants to provide that for him. It also reflects a rhythm they've probably established at this point. Letters are their lifeline, like we've talked about, and she wants to ensure that nothing interrupts their communications. If he doesn't have any paper to write on, she doesn't want that to be the reason that he doesn't write her. So she wants to make sure he's got paper to write her in envelopes. Her good night and her blessing here. Good night, my dear darling. God bless you. It's always gentle. It's always very intimate. It's always protective. I don't know if I'm sure you've noticed it. She's always asking, in her closing, she's always saying, God bless you and keep you safe always. That is so important to her. Her prayer for him. It's a final act of that emotional intimacy before the day ends for her. It's that ritual that she's got going at the end of these letters, that ritual of love and the care that kind of anchors both of them, no matter the distance between them. And then she always ends with all my love. And sometimes she says it this way, from your very own Lucy. We talked about belonging to each other. We talked about that last time. And here's a very clear representation of that, from your very own Lucy. She is making sure and emphasizing that possessive affection here, that she belongs to him in that very sweet, tender way that she does. And after all the playfulness, the longing, all these reflections in this letter, this ending that she ends with is always comforting, and I'm sure very familiar for Jimmie, and I'm sure he really always loves reading that. Now, just really quickly, I know this has been a very long episode, but this letter was over 2 pages long. This is a very long letter. But going back to the paper and the envelopes, these were rationed during World War II. Soldiers and civilians alike often ran out of stationery because of the rations. So Lucy offering to supply more here shows how crucial letters were. They weren't just casual notes. They were the main thread holding relationships together during this time. And then phrases like, God bless you and keep you safe always, were very common in wartime correspondence, reflecting the very real dangers soldiers faced. There's that saying that there's no atheist on a plane that's crashing or something like that. You know, when you are worried, when you think something bad is going to happen to someone, we call out to God, we pray. And so she's always, always finishing that with that prayer. It's like a prayer. God bless you and keep you safe always. I'm sure she prayed that constantly for him. But it's a mix of affection, care, and it kind of shows a little bit of her spiritual side, what's going on with her spiritually. And it's that small, almost ritual that she does each time she finishes this letter, that she wants her loved one to be protected. And she just always finishes the letters with some sort of almost prayer. Today, in modern days, we take stationery for granted. I don't even know the last time I bought stationery. I don't even know the last time, well, maybe my daughter, she wrote to Pen Pal, but, where to even buy stationery? I guess Amazon or something like that. But email, I guess, is a form of digital stationery, but email and text don't require rationing, and our stationery is not being rationed. So sending a note via email and text don't require anything. It costs practically nothing. But Lucy's offer here of extra writing paper shows that physical letters were precious resources, and it required planning. She was going to have make some effort to get that for him. And so this is just a different way to look at how much they had to want to write each other. They had to make a huge effort. Sending a quick text or an instant message or anything like that doesn't require a lot of effort to instantly communicate with people. So thinking of this side of things, that she had to go out and find the stationery to even write him letters and find stationery to send to him, also brings to light the differences in the contrast of then versus now. Even now, people say good night or send digital kisses or emojis or things like that when communicating digitally. But Lucy's ritual here at the end of her letters is timeless. These small gestures, these repeated gestures, create intimacy. She also always ends her letters with, I think, 6 small X's and then 1 big X. And so that means kisses, if you're not familiar with that. So that and your very own Lucy are very enduring. They're very intimate. And so she always ends her letters like that. So her signature here leaves no doubt that this letter, these words, and this heart belong entirely to him. And she does that in almost every letter. It's a reminder that in the middle of war, intimacy and love find a way, even through paper and ink. So we continue on this journey with Lucy and Jimmie as they detail their life and their love and the longing that they have for one another and how much they can't wait to be together. Now, this is the end of September of 1944, and we already know that they are not reunited for another year and a half. So there are a lot more letters to come. There's a lot more war that they both have to endure. And there's a lot more detail that Lucy provides us about what she has to go through as a civilian in London. And then there's some very interesting things about her life and their wedding and things like that coming your way. So just make sure that you have subscribed to the YouTube channel and hit that little bell so that you get the notifications when we upload new episodes. We are on Facebook and Instagram if you want to follow us there. We don't post a lot there, but we do post when we do new episodes, we put them there. And then we are also trying to get going on Spotify. We're a little slow there, but we'll eventually have everything up there. So we really appreciate you joining us today. I know this has been a very lengthy, probably the longest letter that we have had thus far. So really hope that you've enjoyed this. Thanks for sticking around. And we appreciate from the bottom of our hearts you coming along this journey with us. And we hope to see you next time. And we hope Megan will be back next time for the next episode of the All My Love Lucy podcast.